All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. We are very excited that you joined us. If you haven't tuned in, this is the show where we talk to celebrities, thought, and industry leaders to really discover their journey to success. I am super excited that you're joining us. This show is like no other. I can promise you that. You might laugh, you might cry, but you will definitely leave inspired and gain a whole new level of insight into those people that you follow, love, and admire.
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. Very excited for today's conversation. This is going to be a fun one, right? It's really interesting, too. I think I just gravitate. I grew up in Kansas City, but for some reason I lived in New York for 6 years, I live in Austin now. I gravitate toward the New Yorkers. I don't know what it is. I feel like, that's what it all, no matter where people end up, they came from New York. And it's like, I feel like a part of me is still there. So this guy is busy. I mean, you want to talk about busy, all right? He's a Sundance Award-winning producer, best-selling author, founder of a magazine company with over 1.5 million readers. Currently, he's the CEO of the world's largest global network that connects, educates, and empowers creatives to connect with each other in the entertainment industry. And I hear, as if he wasn't busy enough, he might have a TV pilot going on as well, too. Keynote speaker at big conferences, has taught at Harvard, Columbia, USC. Please join me in welcoming producer, entrepreneur, business owner, and entertainment industry master connector, Richard R.B. Botto. Richard, thank you for joining us.
Jake, thank you for having me. Man, what an intro that was. That was unbelievable.
Hey, man, we do our research here, man. Like I said, we like to get back in history, right, as everybody knows here on the show. So, but it's cool, man. And again, I kind of did a quick foreshadowing there about where we're going to go back to. So for those of you tuning in for the first time, those of you who listen every week, you know that we kind of go back in time. We tell the stories of business people, celebrities, athletes, and the things that shape them and the weird conversations they like have with their dad or their mom or some random person, and like all of a sudden they go left instead of right. So with you, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. New York guy doing it up in LA now. I know you spend a lot of time back in New York. So I know for you, grew up in Brooklyn and Staten Island. So I've talked to a lot of the people who grew up in like the Upper East Side, right, or Upper West Side. And depending on the decade, yeah, right, that was real dicey too, right? But you grew up Brooklyn and Staten Island. What was that like for you, whenever you were growing up? What are some of like the big memories you have or experiences that you've helped, that helped to shape you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I have a romantic attachment to Brooklyn because it's where my grandparents grew. My grandparents were first and second generation Italian, came to America, settled in Brooklyn. And so the Brooklyn I grew up in was very Italian-American neighborhoods and very family-oriented, also very business-oriented, very entrepreneurial-oriented. You knew all the shop owners. My grandfather was a carpenter and electrician and, ran his own thing. And that's my father's father. My mother's father worked for GM, so I kind of got to see both ends of that spectrum. But Brooklyn,
what part
in that
of
time,
Brooklyn? What neighborhood were you in?
Bay Ridge and Bensonhurst. Cool. So it definitely, there was, Brooklyn was going through a lot of changes back then, as it is today. Really, I mean, it's kind of fascinating to see where it's been and where it is now. But I got to see all sides of it. I mean, I got to see the crime and the challenges, but I also got to see the family and the friends aspect of it and the community aspect of it, which you don't get to see, the neighborhoods, as we used to call them, which you don't really get to see as much of anymore. And then really, I mean, honestly, the Staten Island I grew up in too. I mean, I grew up in a part of Staten Island called Great Kills, which was, what we call Pleasantville back in those days. But it's changed dramatically. You go back there now and they have a lot of challenges and a lot of crime and unfortunately, but I got to see it at its best, I guess, and so I had a very cool childhood and a good upbringing. I was surrounded by a lot of positive-minded people. That's not to say I was sheltered. I certainly saw my fair share of shit go down, but I was surrounded again by family and friends, and even when tragedy hit, which it did for us in our neighborhood a few times. With some really sad happenings, I got to see the community rally around it. So was taught a lot of life lessons and a lot of hard lessons at a very early age, and but wouldn't have traded it for the world.
What are some of the things? I mean, obviously, whether it was with family, and you think about some of the memories of, your dad. Your dad was in. He also did advertising, right?
Yeah, pharmaceutical.
Yeah. So, what are some lessons? I mean, again, you talk about it, and there's the lessons you learn from being out with your friends and doing dumb shit, and then there's the lessons that you learn. It's never from doing the right thing, right? Sometimes you learn from the right thing. It's always the dumb shit that teaches us. So, what are some of the things that stand out for you? Memories or interactions with your dad or your mom that you feel like you kind of look back or reference from time to time as a guide or a litmus test for you.
Yeah, I think with my mother, it was everything is possible, right? I always wanted to. I wanted to pursue a life in the arts, and where I grew up, that really wasn't something that people did. That was something that people in Hollywood did. California might as well have been, Mars, for us when we were growing up. It just didn't happen. But my mother always believed in my creativity, which was a huge plus for me and a huge booster for me when a lot of people were saying, well, that doesn't happen to people around here. My father, on the other hand, he was entrepreneurial minded, but he did work for a big corporation. He started in pharmacy, went to pharmaceutical advertising, worked for a big corporation. A bunch of people that he worked with decided to branch off and start their own boutique pharmaceutical advertising company in the middle of Manhattan, right by Madison Square Garden. And that was a lesson unto itself as well. I mean, going to those offices and going to the dinners and being a kid and, having to kind of be on at a young age at these dinners and, impress people and be polite and be smart and know what the hell I was talking about. It taught me a lot of lessons. And it just showed me how hard he worked, especially seeing how hard he worked when he worked for somebody else. But then when he went off and started his own thing and was working even harder and had to grind even harder. So there were a lot of lessons early on about, the rewards of working hard and what you have to put in, the sacrifices you have to make sometimes. There were a lot of late nights for him and a lot of weekends where, he was, he was always around for us as far as like coming to games and managing teams and stuff like that. But there were also weekends and weeks where, he had to lock himself in an office and get shit done. And you learned, the lesson and that there's rewards that come with that hard work. So those are some of the things I learned early on. And certainly my grandparents, I learned a ton as well. I mean, that the value of family and the value of also working extremely hard. Both of them were enormously successful, but in very different ways, one blue collar and one white collar.
Man. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I think, again, it's like the things. I've got a 7-year-old boy, right? And so for me, I he's just at that age now where I'm like, he's watching everything. And you're just like, just starting to think about the example that you're setting, and that combination of working hard and showing up, I think, is something that a lot of parents, especially today, you're working at home, etc., can be tough. And so what kind of do you know what sparked the interest in the theater, like, for you? Because obviously then as you start to kind of grow up, you start to get more interested in the theater and start to do different things. And what where did that come from? Where did that initial spark come from?
Yeah, I mean, I always loved film, and I always loved the business of film. Even at a very young age, I was always fascinated by how these things came together. But again, there wasn't film around me where I could go to see something being filmed or be on a set or anything like that. And during one summer, I had the opportunity to go to a theater camp, which I went to more from the standpoint of I wanted to write.
Okay.
I wanted to, write plays and get involved in that. And it was a nice switch because I was always going to baseball camps and everything like that. And I got to do both. So it was kind of cool. I would go to baseball camp during the day and then go to the theater camp in the afternoon and night. And they made you do everything. You got to write, and I did get to write, and I got to write, small plays that got acted out and everything like that. But you had to act, and you had to, you had to perform, and you had to help build sets, and you had to do everything. And I did it a few years in a row, and by the third year, they cast me in the lead. You put on a big play at the end, and they cast me in the lead, and I was stunned by that because, I was always playing in the background and all that. But I loved it, and I just really, really enjoyed it. But again, at that point, it's like, where do you take it? So for me, it was taking theater classes and acting classes in college and writing classes in college alongside of going for a pharmacy degree, which was
I want to talk. That's what I want to get into. So okay, so you've got this passion for you're doing sports, you're getting really into theater, all the different aspects, and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna be a pharmacist, right? Or get my pharmacy degree. So tell me about that. You're at LIU in Brooklyn. I know that place well. Tell me about like what was the drive. Obviously, your father was in advertising and pharmaceuticals, so you were there was exposure. What made you want to get into that?
Well, really, honestly, it was the low-hanging fruit thing. So my father was a pharmacist, my brother was a pharmacist, and I worked, by virtue of all that, I worked as a pharmacy technician in a pharmacy in Staten Island. And you're not really supposed to be a pharmacy technician until your third year of college. I was doing it in my third year of high school. So, hopefully the statute of limitations on that is long past. I think I'm okay. But I got to learn so much, and I knew so much. And, it was the type of thing that I actually went to my brother's fifth-year pharmacology final. And on our way to a New York Mets game, we had to stop off at the college for him to take this final. And they gave me the test while I was sitting there, and I actually got like an 85 or something, or an 86 or something like that. And that was 50th pharmacology. Right. But it was, I knew I was around it all the time. So this was going to be an easy ride for me going to pharmacy school. I was going to breeze through it. And fortunately for me, I wanted to go to film school, and I actually made one. My father was convinced that I was going to go party and said, why don't you try this pharmacy thing first? Because if you go, that's all you're going to do is party. He probably was not wrong.
Right.
In the grand scheme of things, he probably wasn't wrong. But fortunately for me, one of the electives I took in college was a creative writing course, and I had a teacher who was an all-time character, who basically walked in the first day and said, I've been teaching English here for 25 years, and I know you didn't come here to learn how to write, and I know you think you're going to breeze through this course, and I've given 3 A's in 25 years.
Great.
And needless to say, like half the class didn't show up the next day, but I did. And after about half a semester, he just called me into his office and he said, these are the best papers I've ever read in 25 years. He goes, why are you in pharmacy school? And I told him, well, my father was a pharmacist, the whole thing. And he said, go home and tell your father you're going to buy him a fucking pharmacy and go write, go create.
That's awesome.
And that's
man.
literally what he said to me. And that was pretty much the end. That's when I started going out and pursuing, I talked my father into it more or less, and the rest is history.
That's wild, man. So, yeah, and especially, it had to have been, except do you have any of those papers? Do you have any of those stories?
It's funny you asked that. I actually do have a couple in storage, that I came across.
You got to put those out sometime.
It's really, really cool. I wrote about him in my book, and he everybody in their life needs champions, and I always say that you have to go through life always trying to, gain more of them. It's the way the world moves. But without somebody like that in my life, and then one other English teacher as well that came along and really, really gave me that extra shove, who knows? I probably would be, filling your a prescription.
Oh man, that's wild. Always thinking about what could have been. And so then, again, obviously, so you're like, okay, I've got this skill, I've got this passion. What led to Razor? Why was that the thing for you at the time?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question too. So I had all these sort of sidetracks. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew I wanted to do, and being creative and being an actor or a writer. I preach this all the time on Stage 32. You are an entrepreneur. You're the CEO of you. If you're writing, if you're acting, you do these things. You may come together to do them collaboratively, but once that project's over, you got to go to the next one. You got to manage how you're doing it. So to me, even being creative was, an entrepreneurial pursuit. And I was in the middle of running a tech company with my brother, and we were doing billing for e-commerce companies and things like that. And this opportunity, I always found that there was a void I grew up with, towards the end of it really, but, the GQ type magazines, the sort of the Guy's Guy magazines and all of that, and I felt like there was a massive void. It was when Maxim was really
I remember
up.
that. So for everyone, this is like late 90s, early 2000s, just to put
it's early 2000s.
Maxim. That was. I remember I was in high school. I was like, this is the best.
And then, but everybody bowed to it, right? GQ became Maxim, Esquire became Max. Like everybody started bowing to the babes and booze and babes type thing, or the beer and babes type thing, as we used to call it. And I was like, there's got to be something to fill that gap. And I got to talking to somebody, and the long story short is that we went down the road and we basically started this magazine that we wanted to be sort of an upscale men's magazine that we used to say positioned itself for when you were done with your Maxim years but not ready for your Esquire years. And, we competed in a very difficult space, but we ended up outselling GQ and Esquire over time, and our readership kept climbing and climbing and climbing. The only problem with where we were was timing, because a lot of the internet, the web was blowing up as far as not just traffic, but where ad dollars were going. And a lot of these companies were stealing from their ad spend. They were stealing from their print spend to put it online. And even though we had an online component, we were way ahead of our time. And really, back in those days, everybody was like, I want the front page of Yahoo. I don't want to be, I'm going to put my, my men's clothing.
So it's like a big billboard. Like, what's the biggest, not what's the most targeted, right?
1,000%. So, but yeah, I mean, it was an amazing experience, and brought me a ton of contacts. And we had some of the best people in the world writing for us, from David Mamet to Martin Scorsese to Mark Cuban, you name it. We had so many great writers that wrote for us regularly, and that's why we sold so well. I mean, at our peak, we were, I think, at 1.5 or.
That's what I have. Yeah, 1.5 million. And I mean, what was it like in the early? I mean, I'm just curious here, like. To get guys like, you just mentioned, like, what was that process like? You didn't have like a reputation, right? Early on, you were building one in the space. Like, do you, like, there any kind of fond memories or anything that you have around like getting these, convincing these guys to get involved?
Well, yeah, I'll tell a great one. I mean, you're 100% right. First of all, not only did we not have the reputation and not have the connections, but there was actually a fear of us when we started doing pretty well. So like the Condé Nast and the Hearst out there, who are these just gigantic publishing firms and houses, they would come after us. And it was interesting. They would try to get people to boycott us and everything like that. And we just pushed through. And I mean, it became the type of thing that when we got to know certain people, like I became great friends with the Sopranos guys, for example, during that period. And they knew, for example, Scorsese. So I'd be at an event and Scorsese would be at an event, and I'd be like, look, you got to, somebody would vouch for us. And I said, you got to come write for us. Mark Cuban, quite honestly, I was playing blackjack with him in Vegas. And I said, you need an article. And he said, I'd love to have an article. And he did. And so it was that kind of thing. And of course, as you know, when you kind of get one,
then it starts to trickle.
You can start pulling in the rest, right? So, and it's just word of mouth. We had a sterling reputation. We took care of our writers, and we were known as, we weren't afraid of like long form journalism, which a lot of these magazines have kind of became that McNugget type journalism that, and they love that. They love to be able to have a blank canvas to kind of come in and talk about what they wanted to talk about.
And then so again, then you talked about like, again, kind of riding high, and then it kind of starts to kind of come to an end. Like, what point did you know it was kind of time for your next thing?
So there's two sides to the magazine business. One is the readership, and the second, of course, is the advertising. The readership for our last 10 issues went up every issue. We closed with our highest readership of any issue. The problem was, again, they were all these advertisers were pulling their ad budgets and going online. So the amount of money being spent in print, and that's true to this day, and this is why like the Mademoiselles of this world that were there for 80 years and everything like that have disappeared, and also why the GQ, March and September issues, which were, the fashion issues, if you this thick, like a phone book is like this thick now, is because the ad dollars just aren't there. So the writing on the wall came. I sat with just a awesome guy. He was one of the buyers. I'm not going to name the fashion company because he might still actually be there, but everybody in the world praised our fashion and said, we want to come into your magazine. The big problem was one night we went out for drinks, and he just said to me, he goes, I actually think what you're doing in fashion is better than any other men's magazine out there, and quite frankly, better than most of the women's. He goes, but here's my problem. If I pull my ad buy out of GQ or I pull my ad buy out of Esquire, I have to pull my ad buy for my women's clothes and everything else out of all the other ones, because they're not going to give me the discount across all the Hearst brands or all the Condé Nast brands. So this is what's going to be your problem right now, all right, is getting people to surrender on that side And that's a sea change, right? They've been buying in these magazines for the last 30, 40, 50, in the case of Esquire, 60, 70 years. That's your problem. So we knew the writing was on the wall a little bit as far as that was concerned. We had a massively successful online component, but they just weren't, as you said earlier, they wanted the biggest billboard, not the targeted billboard. And it took them years to figure that out. And ultimately, that's what really kind of did in the print business in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about just how big you and Maxim, just thinking back, it's like, now where are they? Where's...
Well, and Maxim now has a lower readership than we had at our peak. I mean, the amazing thing was that if you really think about it, people remember the explosion of Maxim. Maxim at the peak did 2.5, and we did 1.5, and we were a single title publisher. I mean, it was, that came in and just blew up the space. So I couldn't be more proud of it. I wish we could have kept the online component going, but it just, again, at the end of the day, you need the ad dollars to support that.
And I think that's a story for a lot of people during that time. And so during that time, though, you're still staying involved in theater, and, when do you get into like film, some radio hosting, film producer, how did you start to get into that world?
That's so funny. I mean, so I was doing a lot of things at once. I mean, it was a 6-year run with Raze, and during that time, I got to be a guest. The radio, sports radio talk, really, I got to be a guest on a bunch of ESPN shows, and a bunch of hosts would bring me on to talk sports and whatever. And we used to throw a baseball preview party as part of Raze magazine in the spring in Scottsdale for the Cactus League part of Major League Baseball. And we would have all the players, and we would throw a party for 600, 700 people. And we became kind of known as the men's magazine that covered MLB. MLB loved us. So by virtue of that, I got to be on the radio a lot. And it led to me getting a radio gig. And I was doing a sports radio's talk show at the same time that I was running Razor. So that lasted for a few years. The theater stuff and the writing, kind of went away for a little while. I was editing other people's writing. Not that that's a terrible thing to be getting in articles from David Mamet and having to tell him that, you got to change this, or this isn't good enough, which I had to do a couple of times. I actually had to call him one night in the middle of the night. We were going to print and tell him that this article isn't going to cut it. And I needed a couple of Jack Daniels, a couple of drinks before I made that phone call. But it all worked out. But the one thing that I was doing was I was making, some connections and some contacts. So when Razor ended, and I wanted to get into producing and writing and acting again, I had the contacts, but the problem was I didn't have the cachet. People now knew me as a magazine publisher, a magazine editor. They didn't know me as, this guy could pull together a movie, or even worse, that this guy could write a movie or even act in one. So it was a big-time proving ground for me. And, somebody said to me very, very early on, everything about the entertainment business is the value you bring to the table. And I didn't have a lot of value to bring to the table at that point, so I had to create value for myself. So I got involved with a film called Another Happy Day. It landed on my desk. It was called something else at the time. It was Sam Levinson's first script that he was going to direct. Sam now, of course, directs and created Euphoria on HBO. But back then, this was his first film. And his father was Barry Levinson, who did Diner and Rain Man and everything like that. But Barry wasn't going to give his son, his son had to go out and earn it. So he did. He went out, he wrote this script. It went through just 2 years of changes. It started as a script, I believe, called Meet the Hellmans, and then ended up being Another Happy Day. And I proved my worth by coming in and providing some value by getting a couple of investors in, helping out a little bit with some locations, hustling in every way I could, and became a producer on that film, although I won't get into how the titles changed on that film. That was almost a very big legal battle, but that's another story for another day. But we ended up going to Sundance. It won Best Screenplay, standing ovation at the Eccles, which is the big theater at Sundance, 3 o'clock on a Sunday, which is the prime spot that you want. And it was a great first splash for me, and it just led to more and more opportunities, because now people had seen the value that I brought to that project, and were like, they wanted to be in the business of me now, and helping them, or listening to me as far as here's my script.
Yeah,
now.
Listen now.
Here's my.
You get that first foot in. So what was, again? So you're starting to get into that world, but then then you decide to start Stage 32, and again, this is like what, 2011. right around.
Yes.
And so what was it for you? I mean, again, talk a little bit about, kind of like what was the need you saw? And again, and you kind of think about your path, and you're still involved, you're producing still, and you're, again, acting and kind of continuing that. But, you're starting like a very real company, right? It's not like it's like two dudes in a dream, probably at the beginning, maybe it was, but like, and you're still doing all these other passion activities, but like, what was it about Stage 32 that you're like, man, this is a need, and I want to grow this thing into a real business? I mean, serving, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars of hours of, training and other programs. Like, what made you get into that world?
Well, it really was out of a need. Like, most tech CEOs will say that they built something out of a need that they saw in the marketplace. I saw the need in the marketplace, but I built it for myself. I saw the need for me. And what I mean by that is, while we were doing Another Happy Day, I saw that, here you are making this independent film with a great cast. I mean, Demi Moore, Thomas Hayden Church, Ellen Barkin,
Kate Bosworth,
Ezra Miller. Bosworth. I mean, it was a great cast, right? And everybody is, playing down, right? It's not a big budget where, it's maybe $3.5 million, I think. And, so nobody's staying at the Four Seasons. We're all staying at a Hyatt in the middle of nowhere. But everybody's hanging out on equal terms. Like, everybody's hanging out, having beers and just chilling, and with the cast and crew. And, it's that camaraderie that you get with independent films that you maybe don't get with the bigger budget stuff, that everybody's kind of in it together. We're all going to scratch and claw, and we're going to make the best film we can make. But, there's an end to that. And I used to say, like, it's like going to summer camp, right?
Right.
The whole time we're going to stay in touch with one another and all that. And then you really don't until people need something. And with the need for the crew that we had was that at the time we were all filming in Michigan, because Michigan had the biggest tax incentives in the country. So everybody was running to Michigan to get the big breaks. But then that dried up. The Michigan government, pulled the incentives, and now all these people that were flush with work needed to go find work, and they were calling me up saying, like, who do you know and who do you know? And the reality of the situation is that this is, all businesses are tribal, but this one probably more than any other one I've been in. In fact, not probably, absolutely more than anyone. You're only as good as your contacts in this business, and you need to have them, and you need to cultivate them. So for me, it was like, how do I help these people, for one, but how do I help myself to accelerate that? There's only so many events you can go to. There's only so many nights you could be out. And, here's social media. Here's Facebook blowing up. Twitter had just kind of launched. And I started asking people in the industry, are you on Facebook? Are you on Twitter? And if so, what are you getting out of it? And the reality was that they were on it, but they weren't getting anything out of it. And, again, at the end of the day, it's great to be connected to 50 people in the business, but if you're sharing pictures of your dogs and your salads and your babies, it's not going to accelerate your business, right? People looked at LinkedIn as too sterile for our industry. So I was like, okay, what's that platform that is strictly for creatives? And if there was one thing I learned running tech companies years earlier, it's that when there is a broad idea that hits in technology, it always filters down to a niche level. You'll always have those big platforms that that are going to be the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the Twitters, upstarts like Clubhouse and stuff like that. But it's going to filter down to niche, sort of things. So I felt like, what would be the niche network that could represent everyone in the film, television, and digital content, creatives on the creative side and on the professional side. And that's where Stage 32 was born and bred out.
That's amazing, man. And what was, again, so it sounds like, again, you kind of around that time, right? That's Facebook's just starting to pop. LinkedIn is just kind of starting to, like, oh, wait, is this a job site? Like 2011 still is pretty much a job site. And so what, how did you evolve it? Obviously, this is, kind of your passion and, what you've been so involved in so long, but obviously you continue to evolve it. One of the things, as I was, kind of diving in is just around like all the training and different webinars and classes and all these things. So like, how did you, so first is this idea of like connecting this group of people, but you've evolved it quite a bit. And so talk maybe a little bit about the evolution, and how you've thought about continuing to add value versus, first, just adding more features that are about just call it like connecting, in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, the goal always was to connect and train, but we knew there was a few things, early on that I certainly knew just from being in the business. And one is, again, this is a business that just hates change. Okay, they are so stuck in their ways. It's so incredible. It's changed dramatically over the last few years for a number of reasons. But we knew that to get in, we would have to really present. It was going to take years to present the case and to prove our case over and over again. So we had to build a community, and we had to show that community value. So one of the things I committed to early on was that I was going to stand out in front of the community, that this wasn't going to be like a faceless, nameless entity, that I'm going to stand out in front of it, and I'm going to tell you that I'm just like you. I'm scratching and clawing just like you. You know, I'm creative just like you. I'm a professional just like you. And we're here to help each other. And the way we're going to help each other is you're going to help me build this community. So I ask you right off the bat, if you're getting any value out of it, invite at least 5 fellow creatives. That request is still there to this day. And that's how we went from 100 people that I invited to the beginning and almost 5,000 in 3 months, and now close to 1 million today. The second thing was we knew we wanted to have education. We wanted to train people because there's so much bullshit.
That's what I wondered. Like, where did that come from, right? Like, because you definitely could have, you know, there's their whole course world, especially in your world. God, I can't even imagine the courses people are slanging out there now, ClickFunnels about like breaking into the entertainment industry, right? Like where did that passion come from for the education piece?
Pretty much from there. I mean, I was writing a script, and I decided I wanted to do see if there was like a rewriting course or a second draft course online, just to kind of sharpen the skills and you know get in the mood for it. And I found one, and I had never heard of the guy. The guy said that he worked for like Warner Brothers and 20th Century Fox at the time, and I was like, I know people there, so did some digging, and then I just Googled him, and the freaking guy was he didn't change his LinkedIn. His LinkedIn, he was a freaking insurance adjuster from Nebraska. And I actually went right to him, and I'm like, if you don't take this shit down, I'm going to expose you like you wouldn't believe it. And of course, it disappeared the next day. But that happens. That still happens in this business. There's a lot of people in this business. So I knew that I wanted to have world-class education, being taught by people. And at this point, I had started to speak on panels and stuff like that, being asked to speak on panels. And even when I was speaking on panels, I was on panels with people that had done it 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Their heart's in the right place, but they're doling out information to people that are paying great money to be there that just isn't applicable to today. So I knew very early on I wanted to get world-class educators, people that are doing it right now, that are in the trenches today, that can give you actionable information that could affect your career today. But we also knew that it was going to take years to build up those relationships. So we didn't introduce education at all until about 2014. So that was about year 3 going into year 4. But once we did, it blew up. I mean, everybody wanted to come teach for us. And of course, again, like I was even saying with Raze before, the more experts you bring in and the more top level people you bring in, the more of those types of people that want to come in. Because the one thing that's also very true about this business is that people that climb the mountain in this business, I have to tell you, they want to get back. People in this business understand how difficult it is. So, it's not like we don't pay our educators, but a lot of time our educators, we offer them the opportunity to donate their fee to charity, and they do, just because they want to give back. It's not about the money for them. So we have been able to bring in the best of the best. We now have the world's largest library of education for film, television, and digital content. We couldn't be more proud of that. And then the next evolution, of course, was to create, once we connect you and once we train you, now we want to facilitate the connection between
That's my next
creator.
question, is marketplace. Like, how do you then you're like, and you're probably starting to see, I'm thinking 2014, 15. Yeah, Facebook Marketplace, I guess it maybe was out then. I'm trying to think. It's a lot more prevalent now. But yeah, and then what gave you that marketplace idea, to dive in on that?
Because, really at the end of it, really the honest truth is that executives don't want to weed through a ton of shit. Like, and executives have to weed through a lot of content. Casting directors have to get in front of, they have 1 million actors come in and everything like that. Everybody wants to shorten the path. And now in this day and age where we're creating more content than ever, when you have companies like Netflix committing $19 billion in original content in 2022, Whoa. Disney $34 billion. Okay, they don't have the time to sit and read through 1 billion scripts or talk to 1 million producers or investors or whatever. They need this curated content. So this content is flowing through us. It's being curated. And then what we're doing is we're taking the great content and bringing it to the production companies, the investors, the streamers, everybody, to shorten that path and make those introductions. And, you know, we're very, very proud. Over the last year and a half, we signed a deal with Netflix, a partnership deal with Netflix, where they have basically hired us to help train people all over the world on how to develop Netflix content.
Awesome.
Because again, to commit $19 billion in content.
Yeah, you need the content. Now I need people out here making it.
So, you know, the beauty is we're getting to train everybody, and then we're bringing these people into the platform, putting them through the system, funneling out the great stuff, and bringing that great stuff to, you know, platforms all over not just the platforms, not just the streamers, but the networks, the producers, the other production companies, development executives, managers, agents. And that's where we've had massive, massive success. And that's what we're really proud of, because, you know, if our members find success, it's, you know, a win for us.
Yeah, and let's talk that as we start to kind of wrap up here. You know, tell me a little bit about like what's next for you. You know, you talked about, again, as you kind of continue to add on these pieces and, you know, talk about kind of, you know, the importance of community, and then also, you know, what's new and exciting for you. You're still in the producing game as well too. So, you know, maybe just talk about for stage 2, like what's new and exciting, and then what's new and exciting for RB, and what's like the next thing that we should be looking out for.
Oh, sure. All right. So, for stage 32, I just couldn't be more proud of the community right now, especially with the pandemic. You know, the mental health issues that people have experienced, you know, not just only being home, but also being on broad-based social media. You know, it's well documented, it's well reported on. A ton of people, you know, deleting their broad-based social media apps just because of the negativity and the anger and trolling. And, you know, we've forged a community. We've gotten a ton of amazing press as being the leading community, the leading social network online, fostering a positive-minded and progressive community. And, you know, we've been covered in Fast Company for that, Entrepreneur for that. So we couldn't be more proud of that. The fact that, you know, the Netflix thing has exploded. We've had over 150,000 people watch these free workshops that we're doing with Netflix. That excites us. But what really, really, really excites us is the fact that we have created this marketplace now for people all over the world. You know, we're democratizing the industry by leveling the playing field for all creatives and pros. And that's exciting to us because it's presenting opportunity for people that may not live in an entertainment hub. So we're leaning more into that. We're going to have many more opportunities. We're always onboarding new companies. So that's where that's going. On the personal side, producing a bunch of stuff, and I have you mentioned earlier, a TV pilot that is going through the development portion of this. It's a mountain and a half. I wish people would understand. People that watch shows,
it looks easy. It's like, that probably took like a few hours.
I'm telling you, even when you watch a shitty show, just know. Ton of people worked on it. You know, it probably took forever to get there. So that's happening. And then a feature also is going through the system. A feature script of mine is going through the system right now as well. And that's looking pretty good. It's in the development stage and moving up the ladder. So, it's an exciting time. If you're a creative out there right now, literally, I called it the Great Content Gold Rush of 2021. Everybody thought I was crazy because it was during a pandemic, but it proved to be true. And now I keep saying it's the Great Content Gold Rush of 2022, and I don't see it stopping until at least 2025. You're right,
because they're just it's the race now. You know, everyone's racing. It's a massive race.
And listen, there'll be more consolidation and there'll be casualties, but at the end of the day, the commitment to content spend has never been greater, and it's only going up. It's
exciting, man. It's exciting. Well, look, man, I really appreciate you joining us. I know from these stories, man, I've got a lot of takeaways. I wrote down some notes too about, you know, some just like interesting tidbits, etc. So I really appreciate it, RB, man. It was a really great conversation. I think from the decisions that you've made throughout your life and how you continue to tie to your passions, and I think that's a theme that we try to highlight people who are doing the things that they enjoy, making money at it, and, you know, building communities and businesses at the same time. That if you're in a role where it's like, oh, how can I do this thing? You know, you can continue to hone, and you've been doing this, you know, with Stage for, you know, a decade plus, and continuing to build and continuing to do the things that you love and are passionate about as well. So I think it's a great story that a lot of people are going to get a lot out of.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I appreciate everything that you do for the community. You uplift people, which I love. I think this is all about, you know, especially in this day and age, I think everything is about being selfless and having empathy and presenting yourself to people in a progressive way that lifts people up. So I thank you.
That's what you got to do, man. You give it away, put it out there. It'll be amazing what comes back. And it's obviously, you're living that, man. So thank you again, RB. Everyone else, we will see you next week on the Jake Dunlap Show.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to another extremely fun and interesting episode. I thought it was fun and interesting, so I hope you did too, of the Jake Dunlap Show. Really great, just breaking down everything that makes people who they are, the success, the trials and errors, and I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, and make sure, more than anything, to go over to jakedunlap.com. That's where you're going to stay up to date on all the latest guests, additional details, prep notes. We're going to be sharing everything on jakedunlap.com. So go ahead, go over there. You can subscribe there as well too, and we will see you next week on the Jake Dunlap Show.